Okay, so taking a look at your scores, this breaks it down very nicely. Where did you get this? You said it was a free something?
Yes, it was a free test. I think it was tutoring to something, if I'm not mistaken. They
Okay,
yeah,
240
240.
tutoring. So they give you this exam, and so how many questions was it?
It was not that much. It was about 50. So it was half of it.
Okay, 50. Okay, half of it. I see that. I see where that it says that now. Okay, well, cool. Well, this is a really nice tool, actually. And I'll tell you why, for several reasons. So first of all, you said it was free, and that's like the best thing that I've heard, because everything costs money today. And secondly, oh my God, it breaks down every single competency. Like when I tell my students, try to find an overarching theme for the competency after you read it. And it gives a very nice, like, this is what it's over. So human development is competency one. And that discusses, Piaget's theories of development, Erickson's, Maslow's, all of those human development theories. And not just that, but what does that mean for the classroom? What does that mean? What difference does it make if they're in kindergarten or if they're seniors? Well, actually, it makes a big difference. Their brains are not fully developed at kindergarten, and they're not even fully developed at 12th grade, but they're much more developed, and they're able to analyze things and think abstractly by the time they're seniors, and they can visualize things that we're discussing to them about by connecting to other things, to other prior knowledge that they have, other images in their head to sort of construct. And one moment, Marco, stop it. Hold on 1 second. Sorry. So human development and everything that has to do with that, why we would plan hands-on activities for early child, K through 3, 4, 5, and why we could do a little things that are like more critical thinking, more abstract thinking, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that has to do with human development, and that's what that's talking about. Learning processes, the ways in which the students learn, the different ways in which the students learn. Competency 3 over student diversity, and culture, and you looking at all of the myriad cultures in your classroom and making sure that you take that into consideration, and that you account for that the students feel represented in the class, that they can see themselves mirrored in there, whether it's linguistic representation, cultural, gender, socioeconomic, like whatever myriad difference, which is what diversity means, whatever myriad difference, whatever nuanced pocket of differ that they're in is a culture. Making sure that we get students used to culture, that we respect the cultures, reflect the cultures, and try as often as possible to integrate the diversity and those specific cultures of our students into the lessons, into like the prior knowledge connections, into the activities, into the projects, into the assessments, so that all throughout the learning experience, the student feels themselves represented, feels diversity and cultural appreciation represented all throughout your lessons. One moment, please. I'm going to go get a water, and I'm outside right now. And oops, I'm outside right now, and I feel like I'm getting bitten by mosquitoes. One moment. The beginning of every lesson is the learning objectives, right? So you have these learning objectives, and they come from the TEKS. Every content area has TEKS, and you know how it goes. You have your TEKS and you write your learning objective. One or two, don't make it like crazy and have 17 learning objectives. I mean, calm down. You know, you need to have, doable learning objectives. If you're repeating them, then you can add extra or whatever, just but if you have learning objectives, that also means that you are going to be assessing that. So one of your lessons could be the student, like the learner will be able to discuss reasons for human migration, right? Is that something that you would have the students have to know?
About human migration?
Right. Reasons, do they have to know that in your content area?
Yes.
Okay, so if that was the learning objectives, for them to be able to identify and discuss reasons for human migration, then you would then build an entire lesson around that learning objective. Typically, you'd have more than one learning objective, and you would want to have language objectives too. And the language objectives help you stay on target with your ELLs and supporting your ELLs, so that you're more mindful about it. If you don't write your language objectives along with your learning objectives, chances are you're not going to do mindful instruction, systematic instruction, focused instruction. And that is by law what we're supposed to provide our ELL students. So you have to have those language objectives. If you have other objectives in there, like social emotional learning objectives, bravo for you, but that's not required. I wish it were, but certainly your academic learning objectives, and then your language objectives, and your lesson plan, the materials, the format that you choose, whether it's direct teacher instruction or it's more student-centered, the types of activities you choose should be centered around getting the students to understand that objective, those objectives you identified. And then you should have many ways of assessing those objectives during that class period. Not waiting until the end of the 6 weeks to give an exam, not waiting until the end of the week, to give a quiz. Having during that lesson, connected to those objectives that you identified, ways that you're going to measure their understanding and their progress, because it's those formative before and during assessments, all that informal and formal information that we gather, all that data, our observations, our conversations, their quizzes, their writings, their illustrations, their exit tickets, all of that stuff. We utilize that to drive our design, to say, okay, do I need to reteach? Do I need new strategies? Is this working? If it is, awesome. Let me move on to the next. If it's not, then why not? And let me go and fix that before I move on, because if we just move on, it's not going to work. So you have in lesson planning your objectives. You have your learning objectives, your academic learning objectives, and your language objectives. So you build your lesson around that, your activities around that, around them understanding and being able to show mastery in your assessments. So you have the what you want them to do and how you want them to show you they can do it. and then everything in between that you put in there. And so we don't just give lessons just blah 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 and don't measure. We're always measuring somehow, whether it's via conversation, whether it was observations while I listened to their think pair shares, or while I listened to their small group small group interaction, whatever the case may be. I use that information to dictate if I'm going to modify my plan for tomorrow, my lesson. Maybe those objectives aren't mastered and they need revisiting. So tomorrow, that's what's going to happen. If not, then the new objectives go into play, the ones that build on top of the ones I just gave. So that's what that lesson planning one is about. And you did really well on that one, which doesn't surprise me because, you've been in the classroom and you did really well. So the ones that you struggle with are those concerning human growth, development, whether it's physical, emotional, maturity wise, and how that affects the difference in answer choice. So it's going to be one of those questions that has a grade level or an age group or a special population. You know what I mean? It's going to have like special ed, or it's going to be 504, or it's going to be a kinesthetic learner. It's going to be something about specifically the little human and how you needed to make a change for specifically the human. So that's what you need a little bit of work on. Those two sections are actually the most work on. So it's looking at the student, that information about the nuance of the student, and those are the two sections that you scored lowest on. So human development is about the student, where they are, age group, where they are ability wise, where they are culturally, all of it, gender. And diversity again goes more and more into detail with the culture and all that good stuff. So we'll take a deep look into that. We'll take a look at the technology portion. That it seems but that there weren't that many questions, to be honest with you. Those are the only ones I would say, areas that you need to focus on. Hello?
Oh yes, I'm hearing you. I thought you were gonna say something. I thought you were gonna talk more.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. So can you see my new page?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So you need to focus on only, and we're going to bring it up, and then I'll bring up other pages, but only 1 and 3. Competency 1 and competency 3. So competency 1 is all about, and there it is, human development, the processes, you understanding those processes and then applying that knowledge. And that's the important part. It's not just you understanding what Piaget's levels are, it's you being able to apply what it means when they're in a different age group, what it means when the kids are in that middle age, like what is typical of middle age kids. Normally on their line of growth and development, whether it's, sense of self, mental, emotional, physical, their growth and how that affects their learning. Middle school kids behave in a certain way, and it's because of at their age, they're experiencing puberty, their brains are changing, they're going from that early child where they're not thinking abstractly, they're now able to abstract ideas and things. It's funny, my son, my oldest son was watching a cartoon that the girls watch several times, that he's watched several times, and they think it's really funny. And there's some parts, and it's a kids movie, and there's some parts that are clearly inappropriate. they're inappropriate only if you can think abstractly. If you think concretely and you just hear the words and see the pictures, it's not inappropriate to you. Your brain does not think that. And so I was explaining to my son, because we were watching it, and he said, it's so crazy because like I used to watch this all the time and I never got any of these jokes. Like, he's like, I didn't realize it was like this. And I'm like, the reason you didn't understand it, I mean, the words haven't changed. And it's not that you didn't understand the words when they said them. You were understanding perfectly fine. You enjoyed this movie very much. But they weren't able to think abstractly. They couldn't take social context that came from somewhere else, apply it to what was being said, apply it to the picture, and this to get the dirtiness out of it. Their brains aren't there yet at early child. So kids brains work differently. They learn differently. And so when we want them to learn something, we have to make sure that we are painting a holistic picture, that we're not just showing them the words, that these words with this picture in this context, really, because for students, they have to, the early child, they have to live it and experience it. So
Yeah,
competency
I
one,
understand. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
no, not at all. Understanding the factors of social emotional development. And I have a really good video on just this one, on just competency 001E. And so I'm going to ask you to watch that later so I don't have to repeat myself, but it's really good. And it covers this, the factors of social emotional development and how that affects your planning. And it's like a 15-minute video and it goes on just this section. So for this one, cognitive changes, we just went over that. Emphasis on concrete thinking to emergent and to refinement of abstract thinking. So you have emergence, you have emphasis on concrete thinking in early child, to if emergence, which means the beginnings of, which is in middle school, it begins in 5th and 6th grade, the emergence of abstract thinking. They're like kind of a little bit like, maybe I caught something there, not really. By the time they're in 7th and 8th grade ish, they're refining their abstract thinking skills, and then they continue to refine them as they go on. Continue. We should always be like continuing to refine our abstract thinking skills and reasoning. Increased ability to engage in reflective thinking. We want the students to end up to be reflective learners, to be reflective thinkers, which means that after an activity, they think to themselves, how did I do in that? Like, what did I learn? Like, I do that as myself. If I go to a professional development, I'll sit there thinking about like what was most useful to me, what I felt like was what was a waste of time, what was a little bit confusing, what I wanted more research on. Like, I will do that after I go to something if I'm an invested learner in it. And most of the time, if I'm there, I'm an invested learner. That's where we want our students to end up. But we have to sort of train them to do that. And we have to give them practice on reflection. We have to give them opportunities to reflect on their thinking, to reflect on our activities, to say, okay, so the purpose of this activity was for you guys. I'll give you an example. And this is good for you and it's good for your students. So I give an assignment to my students after we have like direct instruction, reviewing diction, which is an author's particular choice of words, author's particular word choice in any given piece. And we analyze diction in order to identify an author's tone towards a topic or a theme. And so after teaching that, when we do examples and guided practice, we do an activity together. We do an activity to get in groups, and each group gets a different poem. And they have, dictionaries, they have the thesaurus, and they have this other, they have dictionaries and thesaurus with them. And so in the groups, which were carefully crafted to have difference of ability, difference of diversity, whether it be linguistic, socioeconomic, ability, I said that already, learning preference, all of it. In their groups, I gave them different poems. It was the group's job to identify, and they weren't long, identify diction words, and they had to also, after they identified those diction words, they had to, you know, convince us that of the author's tone based on those words that they chose. So they had to do they had to show two things. They had to show that they were able to, they understood what diction was, then they could identify it, and that they could use diction to identify tone. So several things that were going on there. Those are their objectives. They do this, I walk around, I'm checking for understanding. If everybody's like going pretty good and I'm hearing good things, then we don't have to have a let's come back to a whole group discussion and have another example. But if I walked around during that activity and I heard even 2 out of the 5 groups, I'd be like, eesh, I have to go back to the table for this one. But if I heard them really just not picking words at all, like that, no diction words, just like really picking words randomly, and then therefore not being able to identify the tone, I would know that we would have to go back to either me modeling and then doing a guided practice. Again, me modeling and doing a guided practice. After which I would let them go back to the groups, listening through it. Once they got it, they could put it on a piece of butcher paper. And then we would have a classroom walk where everybody, like a poetry read, where different groups would go to down the hallway, stand by the short poem, read it, identify the diction tone, the diction words and the tone. And then the rest of the class, we would discuss like, well, are they on point? Are they not? After all of that activity, we discuss what their objectives are before, and then we discuss at the end reflection. Okay, guys, you knew what the point of all this was. Did we accomplish our goals? Like, what in this activity or the instruction was useful for you to learn diction? Did you learn diction? And if not, what was confusing? Like, what didn't work? Because it should never be a thing where and if you have built, and this is domain 2, if you have built a relationship with your students and a rapport, you should be able to ask for feedback, serious feedback from them, where they wouldn't give you junk feedback or make, silly comments. I mean, you might have one every once in a while because there's always a clown in the pack, but you're going to get real stuff, especially if your activities are fun for them, if they're engaging, if you care about them, because a student that you make feel like they matter will do anything to achieve the goals that you set for them, the goals that they set for themselves, because you said that they could. So, and that's part of the diversity section. That's a big part of that diversity section, because whatever the student diversity makeup is, and we're diverse even in ourselves. I'm not just one thing, I'm many things, I'm diverse in me. So if a student feels like they see themselves represented in the classroom, in the activities, in the instruction, in the assessments, and it could be as simple as like you taking their learning preference and providing different ways for them to be assessed. Just even doing that, if a student sees themselves heard, felt, and like they matter in the classroom, it is like their brain gets out of the fight, flight, or freeze syndrome and just relaxes. And that is when you're going to have those neurological pathways, those creases in the brain that can be used to retrieve information later. The students have to feel comfortable. They have to see themselves. They need that buy-in, and that has to do with knowing them really well and knowing their culture. Understands the development in any of the 1 domains: cognitive, social, physical, emotional. And so those are going to be on that little cheat sheet. That's going to be Piaget's, that's going to be Erickson's. And so make sure you go through those to make sure you understand what is normal per age group physically. What is normal per age group cognitively? What is normal per age group socially, as far as maturity wise? What is normal per age group emotional wise? Like, my 2-year-old would react in ways that my junior high student should not behave emotionally because they are more developed. All 2-year-olds sort of behave in the same emotional way. And that is because developmentally they are on a path. And so it's very important, because this is one of your lowest sections. It's really important that you do go back and reflect, and I'll go back to it right now. Do go back and take a look at, study those developmental areas, and remember that they're never going to say, oh, what's Piaget's pre-oppositional or operational. They're never going to do that. What they're going to do is ask you a question about a certain age group or grade level. And you're supposed to, from that, know, okay, this is where they should be, or, and therefore, these are what some problems they might have at this age group, or some advantages they might have at this age group, and therefore I should respond in this different way. So it's very important that you understand those baselines, so that you can adjust the response accordingly, because remember, they are going to give you more than one correct response sometimes. And that's how they get you. And that's why everybody's like, oh my God, I can't decide between those last two. Well, that's because in the question it says, the most appropriate response. Well, there might be more than one appropriate response, but one is more appropriate than the other based on information that they gave you in the scenario, in the question. So make sure that you're mindful when you're reading them, and that you're looking for age groups, grade levels, special populations, which include ELL, which include special ed, which include 504, which include RTI, socioeconomic disadvantaged, behavioral intervention plan. There's just GT. If they say a student's parents are going through a divorce, I mean, there are so many ways in which the student can be identified as a special population. But if they take the time, kind of like diction words, think of your reading as analyzing for diction. What are the most important words that the author particularly chose to tell me in this scenario? So if they tell you an age group or a grade level, you need to pay attention. If they tell you a special population, you need to pay attention. If they tell you a time during the lesson that they're looking for, you need to make sure your answer responds to that particular time, before, during, or after. Before, during, or after the discussion. We do different things during those different times. Before, during, and after the readings, we do different things at different times. So making sure you pay attention to those words. Recognizing signs of developmental delays, important. Understanding the different signs of play, understanding that that young child, and that's all on this page here. I'll show you. I'm sure you remember. All right, you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so domain 1 is sort of like all of the first page. And it's pretty good for your purposes with competency 1, and only half as good for your purposes for competency 3, because their diversity section is super under par. When this was printed, the amount of questions, the amount of attention, the scope of which we meant diversity was much smaller. So, but this is very good for the human development. When I told you understanding the different normal stages of development, physical, cognitive, social, and emotional. So you have Piaget's, you have Erickson's, you have the physical development and maturation, the different stages. Those early child, they have high energy, low attention span. So if you get a question and it's asking you EC through, I would even say, pre-K through EC through second grade, you want to make sure that you are utilizing tools, that you're cutting the activities down lower in time, that you're allowing them to get up, to move around because they're high energy, and you don't want for them to get bored. Kohlberg's moral development, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What's important to understand about Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that in order for a student to achieve self-actualization, which is what we want everyone to achieve, and where they need to be in order to be operating at Bloom's taxonomy's highest levels. You cannot, and I saw this really cool meme my sister shared, but it said you have to Maslow before you can bloom. And it's such a really ridiculous, it was such a beautiful meme. I think I'm gonna like post it on my teacher channel, but because I love it so much. You cannot expect students to learn if they don't have food, water, shelter, warmth. So too can you not expect them to learn if they don't have security, order, feeling and being safe in school. Hashtag school shootings. They cannot learn if they don't feel love, affection, belonging. That means at home and in school. So if they don't feel love, affection, belonging at home, that means in the classroom, they must feel that they belong. They must feel an appreciation as a human being, a sense of love as a human, approval from others. They have to receive it, earn it, receive it in order to build self-respect and worthiness, a sense of worthiness, a true sense, so that they can have personal fulfillment. All of these steps from lowest to high, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If Maslow is not satisfied, a child will not achieve any of the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. You have to Maslow before you can bloom. Beautiful meme. I'll send it to you later if you want. Like I said, this diversity section, sort of not super duper great, but we're gonna look at it anyway. You have to be aware of your own biases, and that's very important. Reflecting on your lack of knowledge, not just your bias, but your actual lack of knowledge. If you are, a teacher and you get two, what is the word? Exchange students. We used to get them all the time, from Kenya in your classes. First of all, how cool. And secondly, that means that for me, I have to do a lot of research, because now I have to become a semi-expert in Kenyan like culture, because I have to find ways to pool prior knowledge for my Kenyan students. And I have to find ways to teach my non-Kenyan students, which is literally everybody else, to appreciate what a Kenyan is, so that they won't be little jerks on the playground or in the hallways, and so that they can get an appreciation and an understanding, and maybe even a little bit of empathy. So our biases and or lack of information or ignorance in different cultures, and what we mean by cultures is a lot, because socioeconomic, gender, cultural, ethnic, developmental, behavioral, family involvement, expectations, socioeconomic, even like family sexual preference. If you have two parents that are, same sex, that puts you in a different, anything that makes you different is your diversity. And like I said, we belong to several cultures. I belong to several cultures, just me and myself. You have to get to know who your students are, and in order to help them, speak to them, in order to reflect who they are in their learning environment. And if it's not reflected, then they're not going to do what you need them to do. They're not going to have that neural pathway be super deep, because you went the extra mile to provide prior knowledge, to connect it with things from their own unique experiences and diverse experiences in life. So you paying attention to that, making sure that your class is a place not only where you include those things in the lessons, in your direct instruction of vocabulary, in your examples of prior knowledge, in your activities, in your assessments, but also that your classroom is a place that respects it, and that you sort of showcase it as something extremely cool, which it is, and that you don't sort of like approve of ethnocentrism, like the idea of like only accepting one's own culture and ideas, or like we're not going to be ethnocentric, and really looking at yourself and making sure that you are not ethnocentric, that you don't come at every lesson just from your culture, that you are making sure you are including your students' perspectives, experiences, and culture in your lessons, in your small group exercises, in your think, pair, shares, in your activities, making sure you do that. Self-fulfilling prophecy, making sure that you are not, whether hopefully, I mean, I would hope that it would be inadvertently or on purpose, being negative with a student. But a lot of times students will experience a self-fulfilling prophecy where they hear people say certain things, and those, beliefs or biased beliefs, affect the student. And so if you are biased and you think, oh, all ELL students, are never going to be good writers, for one, that is incredibly moronic to say, and two, is opposite completely of my entire teaching experience. And I'm an ELAR teacher, and I taught senior AP English. So I happen to know in the Valley. And so in some classrooms, I would have 32, because my classrooms are always jam-packed, maybe 32 students, and like 18 of them are ELLs. And that was even in AP classes. And my advanced high students were always the most, and this is like every single time I would bet all my money that I've never been wrong. My ELL students have always been, my advanced high ELL students have always been my best writers ever. Their sentences are more varied, and I don't know if it's because they have the syntax and grammar experience and fluidity of another language that they play with. They certainly have access to double the vocabulary. So whatever you might say in Spanish, what you would say in English, there's like 5 ways to say it in Spanish. And one of those ways translates to a synonym in English, which is really fancy. So my ELL advanced high students were the best writers I ever had in my life, to where I was like, oh my God, because I was getting my master's degree and I was thinking, you guys are like doctoral students. And I would tell them, your writing is amazing. Like you, with their essays, whenever they astounded me, I would tell them. I mean, I would really tell them, not blow smoke up their butt, but honestly, it was good stuff. My point is that there are many ignorant teachers who would repeat or say silly, hurtful, moronic things, and students may hear those things or interpret them, and sometimes they're even nonverbal, where you like might roll your eyes or like do something, and the kids are very, especially if they don't come from, like I said, you can't Bloom's until you Maslow. So if they're not getting love and they feel on edge at home, they're going to feel on edge with you for a little while until you build that trust, and you can because if you're joking with them and they don't know you like that, and even sometimes if they know you like that, and you're the one safe place, and you're asking for a response during a whole group discussion, and I say, Edgar, what's the definition of diction?
Should I respond?
No, and so let's say you're in a class and you don't respond, or you give me the wrong answer, and I'd say, oh my God, Edgar, are you serious? You're like my best one, and you don't even know. And that right there, even though you think not big deal, I gave that whatever, you think that student who feels good about being your best one wants to on display with everyone know, I let my person who's nice to me down. It doesn't feel good and it shouldn't happen. So we just have to be very careful, and that we find ways of uplifting them in meaningful ways. We're not just like blowing smoke up their butt and saying, hey, good job for no reason, but telling them, Mike, I would tell my students, your vocabulary is off the charts, and your sentence, the variety of sentences was just flowing like as though you've written English your whole life. I gave them very specific feedback and compliments, and likewise with criticism. I always tried to provide positive feedback with some criticism, but I'm not going to say like this was a bad essay. I will never just say that. I will give you specific things to work on. Like your thesis was a little weak because it started off okay, and then I think there's a run on, but then your body paragraph didn't even talk about anything in your thesis. So I'm going to give you very specific and not be critical, to where it's not about you, it's just the skill, no problem, we'll just fix it together. So considering diversity, considering how diverse your students are, and how you need to make sure that you are providing them equity based on equity of instruction based on their diversity, what they have. So for instance, if most of my students, like when I started teaching in 2003, when I started teaching, nobody had computers at home. In fact, the internet wasn't even what it is today. It was totally different, like completely different. And now everybody has their own device, totally different. Some students still don't have internet at home. That's a fact. There are some students who live in colonias where at their home they don't have it. Maybe abuelita has it and they can go to her house like 2 blocks away, but she doesn't get home until this time. And so if that's the case, you need to know that, and you need to account for it, and you need to make sure that there are ways which your students have access, and that there are no limitations based on whatever their diversity is. If they're an ELL student, if they're a special ed student, you're going to want to extend the wait time after you ask questions during your instruction. And that's you just providing differentiated of instruction, providing different pathways to success based on the differences of your student. If they're tactile learners, if you have a big group of tactile learners, making sure that you have kinesthetic stuff thrown in there. That's a different pathway for success during the lesson for them. If you have students that don't have personal devices, making sure that you have put your name down to use the computer lab to do all of the assignments requiring technology, like making sure you are thinking about the exact students that you have exactly when you have them, and then designing lessons, implementing lessons that are specific to their needs. And they're going to be specific to what they tell you in the scenario.
I see. So I guess that's the question, or those are the questions that get me, because like you mentioned before, they have two questions that are correct, but one is more correct. And I think in some of them I overthink it too much.
Right.
So that's what happens usually for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I'm going to try to put together some questions for you just on these. I'm going to work on them tomorrow. And then at 6, can you log on tomorrow at 6:30?
Yes, I could.
Okay. Tomorrow at 6:30, we will look at some questions, and I'll try to see if maybe you can, get through those, and they'll just be on human development questions and diversity questions.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have a beautiful rest of your evening.
You too. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.